enough of this mining. It's free mining estate.
Story of One Piece being about Whitebeard, it would have been a story where the real treasure was the family and friends you make along the way. And that's just who Whitebeard is, which I think is honestly sort of beautiful. A monstrous, imposing man that despite being taken to the brink of death and losing half of his face, refuses to act for himself, but for the lives of his children, his crew, and his family. Also, a small but noticeable recurring motif I recognized in this section that I meant to draw attention to in my Enies Lobby review were these text fields that are dotted all around the story of One Piece. They read like the writings of a textbook or that of a storyteller speaking about the time that has long since passed. In this particular instance, it reads, "Even in death, even with half his face gone, he would never fall. He will forever be remembered as a monster for the way he destroyed his enemies that day. In this one battle alone, he suffered 267 sword wounds, was struck by 152 bullets, and 46 cannon blasts. And yet, neither that mighty body, nor his pirate spirit, suffered even one coward's wound." To me, this says that the story of One Piece is being recalled or told. So in other words, we are hearing perhaps a retelling of this story, and that also possibly all we've experienced is essentially a flashback telling the story of Luffy's life. This obviously hasn't been confirmed, or maybe it has, I don't know, and I could very well be wrong, but right now it certainly felt that way to me, climaxing on a quote that echoed throughout the pages of the manga in equal parts hopeful and epic, as Whitebeard exclaims in his dying breath, "The One Piece exists," signifying the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. And these two deaths, Ace and Whitebeard, serve as a massive loss in the story due to their significance to the two cornerstones of One Piece. The death of Whitebeard is a massive loss to the world of One Piece, and the loss of Ace is a massive loss to the main character of One Piece. Both hold enormous significance and importance within the wider story, and what consequences there'll be thereafter. And speaking of consequences, there's a surprisingly really interesting symmetry between Blackbeard and Luffy that becomes abundantly obvious in this arc specifically. Both having come from relatively humble beginnings with a singular focus to follow their dreams with reckless abandon. And understanding the full scope of what
farming.
Blackbeard hopes to achieve in this arc rocks the very foundations of the One Piece
Farming
story.
is definitely going to be my first level 90. As is right in this world. I'm a farmer.
To its core,
It ain't
hijacking
much,
the
but it's
scene
honest work.
immediately and unloading a barrage of bullets onto Whitebeard, leading to his ultimate death. But perhaps the most significant aspect of what Blackbeard does in this arc is this. For the very first time in One Piece's entire story, and maybe even its history, Blackbeard has become the wielder of two very powerful Devil Fruit abilities. With this being sort of unprecedented territory, I wonder if he's even less susceptible to water right now. Maybe not, but regardless, this acts as an incredible seed to be planted that sets the stage for the future of this world. But following these events, even more people begin getting slaughtered. It seems in addition to stealing the powers of Whitebeard, Blackbeard also convinced some of the worst, most dangerous pirates from Impel Down to join his crew. This is when we get a glimpse of something we haven't seen since Skype. Kobe starts freaking out that all the people around him are fading away. They're dying. He seems to have this ability to sense where people are and what's happening to them. Things are in an awful way. Luffy is totally out of it, having been lifted away to safety on Trafalgar's submarine, even dropping his hat in the process. And the forces of the pirates are pretty much spent here also. And right as Kobe was about to be taken out, having started his journey as a small kid with more dreams than he had sense, Luffy throughout One Piece has grown stronger, taken down obstacles, built a reputation for himself, and made countless friends over his adventures. But beyond anything I've mentioned in this video, what this arc managed to achieve more effectively than perhaps anything else has been that feeling that the more things change, the more they stay the same. with the first chapter's story being that of Shanks showing up at the last minute to make the save for a very young Luffy. And in this latest installment, rounding out hundreds of chapters worth of growth, he still needs to save the young, headstrong kid with more dreams than he has sense. Even managing to perform the same gesture by giving him his hat yet again, because Luffy isn't ready. The war-torn battlefield, bloodied by the bodies of those that had fought bravely that day, can now rest in peace as Shanks declares that the war is over. I do not have words to describe how perfectly structured and paced this war was. From the beginning to the end, everything made sense, or provided further incentive to carry on the story. And so, let's do that.
Me lad, Luffy. 今日から俺たちは兄弟だ。
The post-war arc. For anyone watching my reviews that have not experienced the story of One Piece firsthand, I can't recommend this series enough, and no matter how flowery my language or how well I describe events that take place, it's not a replacement and won't compare to the vibrant and rich world Oda's created, and that's not even touching on the magnificent character and story writing that fills the pages of Jump's biggest seller. But for those among you that prefer to live through my experiences, I'd like to take this opportunity to apologize in advance for how utterly ridiculous this upcoming cliffhanger is going to be. To describe briefly what takes place within the parameters of this short post-war arc, all I need to say are three separate words: perspective, training, and future. Kicking things off, we pick right back up after the events of the prior arc in a similar fashion to how they kicked off the last one, with the focus fixed on the various communities and gatherings of people who have been watching it on large screens around the world, as well as some notable figures in the pirate community. There's plenty of celebration, and there's some speculation as to what this could mean for the future among everyone, except one. A substantial portion of this arc is spent exploring the past of Luffy, specifically his childhood as he meets with Ace for the very first time, answering questions I had about how and why Shanks had never met the kid before. Garp had left Ace, you see, in a foster care, and we find this out as he leaves Luffy there to get stronger with him. Immediately, Luffy gravitates to Ace despite his insistence on being left alone and wanting nothing to do with him. Day after day, the 7-year-old Luffy would try to follow Ace, who was then 10 years old, to play. But day after day, despite making it farther and farther into the forest each time that Ace would escape into, Luffy loses him, until one day he follows him the entire way through. The dynamic on show here through this interaction with Ace not wanting to be around anyone due to his own childhood, coupled with a less refined, more childish version of adult Luffy's personality. There's a raw, honest childishness to these interactions that are dotted throughout. In this story also, Ace has a friend of the same age called Sabo, and both of them have been gathering treasure so that one day they both can become pirates. Luffy expresses his desire to become the king of the pirates someday, but the bond between Luffy and Ace doesn't begin establishing itself until a particular scene where Luffy, despite being cornered by a pirate looking for the loot Ace stole, Luffy refuses to snitch on Ace. And it's after this beating, Oda presents me with the single most heart-wrenching image I've ever seen in One Piece. In that moment, Luffy gains the respect of Ace, but moreover convinces him that he genuinely wants to be with him. Ace has grown up with people hating him for existing, and Luffy, in this scene, because of who he is, specifically loves Ace because he exists, which is just a beautiful and tragic sentiment that adds even more perspective to Ace's last words, causing me to retroactively lament and cry over that scene even more than I already have. On this adventure, Ace, Luffy, and Sabo make a brotherly bond, citing that they will all sail the seas one day to become great pirates.
ここにいても俺は自由になれない。俺は貴族に生まれて恥ずかしい。
But when Sabo's aristocratic past catches up with him and his father forces him away from Ace, and ultimately into running away from home, his boat is shot by a celestial dragon, killing him. Once this is found out, Luffy and Ace's bond strengthens, as we watch them grow into themselves together, with Ace declaring that he'll never die and that he will always look after his little brother. We get to see both Ace and Luffy set sail for the very first time now with full context for these voyages. And even though this wasn't particularly sad, I found myself welling up as I watched Luffy set sail again from his home in the East Blue. It's sort of overwhelming to think about where this kid came from, what his values are and why he has them, forcing me in that moment to recontextualize everything the series has shown me up until that point. This little story adds so much color to an already vibrant tapestry of a world Oda has already created, creating and reinforcing what could be now my favorite character in all of fiction, Luffy. There's so much to adore about this character, but the main focus of this story, without getting too much into things, is how both Ace and Luffy need to grow stronger to achieve their goals, to protect those they love.
Does it just go crazy?
I got a thing.
You got a thing! Da 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 da! I love it when I get a thing.
By the time the flashback
Got
ends,
something.
both Ace and Luffy significantly have grown
Fuck is
incredibly
this?
strong, and you can see this
It's
on
a
their
thing,
faces of how sure
Pet.
they are as they each shove off for their
Moron.
respective voyages. We've seen their training, the decade-long endeavor Luffy has been on to master his abilities too, but as
Oh
Luffy's
my
honest craft launches from his humble beginnings
Did the game just become godlike, Bat?
I don't know, it's just a really weird thing.
into what we now know becomes a massive adventure, we cut back to the grim reality he finds himself in.
俺は
Oh, I see. Yeah, it still respects those rules.
If that isn't heartbreaking, I don't know what is. Highlighting quite effectively the stark contrast for us between the Luffy that left that day and the Luffy that lies both physically and emotionally broken before us now. Still beating himself up, Jinbei finally intervenes, stopping him from doing more harm to himself.
Wait,
Luffy
what?
throughout this interaction doesn't even resemble the same upbeat person who would look unflinchingly into the future with optimism. He's full of anger, resentment towards himself for not being enough, on top of grieving the single greatest loss of his life. These are new feelings for him, and it looks like he's about to lose himself in them until Jinbei points out that he has something important to live for, that he isn't alone. With that, Luffy silently counts his fingers.
Hello?
Oh, hello.
Each one representing someone that depends
Oh
on
my
him,
god,
that
are you
loves him,
serious?
and that he loves too. Each silently counts important to live for, that he
Oh my
isn't
god.
alone. With that, Luffy silently counts his fingers.
What does it even do?
Your mom.
Each one representing someone that depends on him, that loves him, and that he loves too.
Oh, another lore sequence.
And with that, a new energy riles up in the young bruised pirate as he exclaims,
あいつらに会いてえよ
It fucking closes your game every time there's a lore
This
sequence.
dealing with loss and reconciling it into a
Really?
healthy outlook
It's
is
so
not
fucking
only a
important.
terrific story to
I
read,
don't know
but
if
also an important one for anyone dealing
there's
with
any
loss
relevance
and
to it,
grief, which at some point will happen
obnoxious.
to all of us. But this is where the story starts to get interesting. Even more interesting than it already has been. Planting more seeds than I can count, forming a massive swerve the likes of which left me in the single biggest cliffhanger of my life. Rayleigh surprises everyone by swimming up to the island of women that Luffy is currently on, and presents the Straw Hat with a proposition. The scene then cuts, and we don't know what his plan was. It's at this point we see the Straw Hats in individual scenes scattered across the world. Usopp got really fat. All in very different circumstances, but all with the same goal of reconvening with their captain, whom they know must be hurting incredibly at this moment. Like the rest of the world, they've been aware of what's been happening with regards to the war, and they know what happened to Ace. But as they are making their individual arrangements to head towards their agreed upon rally point in the archipelago, something comes to their attention. It appears Luffy has returned to the spotlight once again. The respective places these Straw Hats have found themselves in have been really interesting too. Usopp's in a giant plant floating in the ocean, Chopper's in a rather advanced civilization, although their appearance might be a little bit deceptive. Zoro is, get this, in Hawkeye's Island. Nami is on a sky island that has advanced weather technology. Frankie finds himself on the island of one Dr. Vegapunk, who I think is the one responsible for the Kuma clones, I'm not sure. Brooke is captured by four-elbowed freaks, and Robin, somewhat auspiciously, finds herself in the company of those that want to bring her to Dragon as a friend. At this point, we still have no idea as to what Luffy has done, and as the story continues, we get a host of short scenes. Duval has been keeping the Thousand Sunny safe, Princess Vivi, her father, and Crocodile all react to what Luffy has been doing in the newspaper. Both Garp and Sengoku retire, making room for the next generation. Aokiji and Spoker both react also to what Luffy has done, but perhaps the most interesting, we get a small look at Kobe, who demonstrated haki power. In this short but illuminating scene, we get information that apparently every naval personnel, from Vice Admiral and up, all have some form of haki ability. But once that scene comes to a close, we finally learn what Luffy in fact did to grab the attention of the world. It could have been advantageous to remain hidden, go into hiding and to pretend to be dead like the Navy already expected him to be. But instead, Luffy rocks up to Navy headquarters, where the war has just finished taking place as it's under construction. All the naval personnel are away, by the way, because this is the last place they would expect anyone to be after what's just happened. And in this stroke of genius, he commandeers a ship, sails around the island in a circle before ringing the bell on the island 16 times. Apparently the bell he rang is called the Ox Bell, and to ring it 16 times is to signify thanks for the prior year and prayers for the upcoming one. It's only carried out by the Navy, and for Luffy to be pictured doing it in a moment of silence, it's a gesture to the rest of the new world that the new era has begun. But what makes this interesting is when each of the Straw Hats see this article.
Pat's having a blast.
Yes.
Nice.
On the paper, they all come to the same conclusion, putting a halt to their plans.
In other words,
they
you
had
should
to
play it.
regroup, instead focusing all their efforts on training to become stronger.
Look at
It's
this.
revealed that this entire stunt of his
Right,
had
if you
one
give me this drop quick, Talon, I'll play it. I'll start it
specific
now.
purpose: to send a
Ooh.
signal to his crew.
you
The
have to
picture that was
give me the
taken of
drop.
Luffy taking a moment of
It's
silence
right here, take
sees
it.
a marking on his arm that reads 3D 2Y. With the 3D
Just take it.
crossed out. The Straw Hats had agreed to reconvene at the archipelago
We'll
in
see.
3 days. But with the 3D crossed out, it seems the new plan Luffy has instructed is 2 years.
I'm still
to
confused,
Get stronger.
but
What a ridiculously
things are
brilliant way
happening.
to communicate a specific message to your crew. To say that I freaked out when I read through this section is an understatement of the highest order, and it's perfectly in keeping with the through line of this story right now. Luffy hates to be alone and away from his friends, but he's willing to extend the waiting period if it means that they are going to be safe together once again someday. And with the crew having decided what their respective training and preparation should be, Luffy follows Rayleigh into the forest, where he begins training, as the old pirate begins explaining to Luffy about the power that dwells within him, providing super interesting exposition that adds context to what already surrounds Ace's death and what Luffy needs to do in order to master the now known to us 3 different types of haki. Words cannot express how utterly giddy and enthralled I am by what I've just read. This is, without a doubt, the greatest story I've ever read in my entire life, and I can't imagine anything coming close in my immediate future. There's an absolute reason why this series, why this story, is so infectiously popular. It's got more heart than most stories out there and has so much more ambition in its telling than I've ever been exposed to. The narrative and poetic symmetry in this story and this very chapter serves to me as a perfect example of why planning your story offers so much in terms of payoff and emotional significance. It's why I've never stopped loving stories. They are the only place where magic actually exists, where good triumphs over evil, and where we can all escape to whenever our daily lives become overwhelming. You can take a small child full of dreams and through his eyes take us on an adventure the likes of which can uplift us and fill us with satisfaction. And so, despite my eyes full of tears, despite my excitement and sense of loss here, I couldn't help but smile as I watched Oda sew the very last stitch in the masterpiece of a tapestry he's woven over the course of what was then 13 years of work. This is an incredible and special moment in what I've come to understand as an incredibly special story. At the end of my second video covering this series, I confess that One Piece could very well be something I can appreciate but never fully love as much as those that grew up with it. And while I can't compare my enjoyment to anyone else's, this video is sponsored by Surfshark.
Let's get started, Raleigh. What? You can't leave it there! Oh my...
I am back from my short break away and I am ready to tackle the rest of this One Piece story. Fully energized to complete my quest to catch up with the rest of the world in this sprawling high seas adventure spanning almost 1,000 chapters as of writing this video. But as of my last video, part 12's completion, I have covered 597 chapters of this Japanese nautical epic as well as the first major section of this story. And with that now in the books, I thought this week, in addition to covering the reuniting of the Straw Hat crew during their return to Sabaody, I thought it would be fun to also reveal my top 5 favorite arcs of the story and my personal ranking of all the Straw Hat Pirates. I think I've got a decent enough grasp of this merry band of misfits in order to effectively rank them accordingly right now, and that's not even to mention my favorite arcs also. But before all that, let me say I am back. But please, for the love of God, like and share this video because the algorithm probably hates me right now. But all of that aside, I am ready to tackle the rest of this incredible story, beginning with my first impressions of, thoughts on, and review for the heartwarming, the tense, and the funny Return to Sabaody. Oh, by the way, I see your comments. Oh, Mark cries at everything.
He's overly emotional.
He needs to man up. First off, rude.
I feel when you get PK'd and they don't even get your spade. Suckers.
Imagine getting wrecked so hard.
Well, I mean, Snake. They got literally nothing.
But moreover, I don't actually cry that much. I meant it when I said that before reading One Piece, I never cried while reading before. Now, do I cry while watching films and TV shows? Yes, like a fountain. But that's besides the point. And what's more is, I haven't just been resting during this vacation from the world of One Piece. I've been training. I've been watching The Notebook, Marley and Me, and Your Name on loop for the past 2 weeks straight. And I can now proudly declare that not only do I not cry, but I am also an emotionless vacuum void of even the most fundamental basic level of humanity. So, with my newfound grit and determination, let's open the story and get back to work. Okay, I didn't actually cry here, but after taking my time away from this story after having sunk so much time into it beforehand, it was sort of nice seeing the story kick off again after what was in-universe 2 years worth of training and time spent apart. Effectively, this very short
Beanie
arc
Bullet
explores
Doggin.
the changes the crew have undergone, including emotional, intellectual, and in many cases physical changes, with everyone in varying degrees changing their appearances. They are after growing up considerably in the last 2 years, and that is very much made evident throughout this reintroduction of the Straw Hats as they rendezvous at the archipelago. So let's check it out. 2 years later. I think my favorite thing about this chapter is how it's framed and presented. The very last chapter I covered before this long breakaway in my last video saw the very last panel with Luffy placing his hat on a rock, symbolizing the beginning of his training and his long break away from his friends. And this chapter, following the time skip, sees that very hat on that rock, now covered in snow, signifying the passage of time and dedication Luffy has had in his training. But, and I am not sure how it's presented in the anime, but in the manga, this chapter takes expressed interest in not showing us, the audience, Luffy's face pretty much for the entire chapter, right up until the very end. The Straw Hat is back, and he's on his way to meet his friends. Something I really like in this chapter too was the laid back and fun character reintroductions we got with the rest of the Straw Hat crew. We see Sanji, who now parts his hair on the other side. Now that's growth. We see Nami, and not to mention Usopp, who's gotten so much more buff. We see Chopper, Robin, Rayleigh, lots of reintroductions that filled me with all sorts of nostalgia I wasn't expecting heading back into this. However, the most interesting part of this small collection of chapters comes in the form of this group of imposter Straw Hat pirates, every one of them pretending to be a particular part of the crew, drawing attention to their presence in the very area they were taken out last time on the very day the real Straw Hats are planning to leave. It's a little more on the convenient side than I'm used to with One Piece, but I'll leave things slide because I'm still enjoying it, and we see moments like this when the real Luffy engages with the fake Luffy. That is a baller move if ever I did see one. However, the real reason this crew is important is primarily down to them being the catalyst for the real conflict of the arc. You see, the reason I called this convenient earlier is largely down to the fact that had they not been at that archipelago that particular day, exactly 2 years from when Luffy sent that message, the real Straw Hats wouldn't have had any conflict really at all that day when they were leaving. But needless to say, they do. And when the Navy catch up with the pirates regrouping at this archipelago, a very familiar scene begins forming. The pacifistas arrive. But this time, things are different. That's right, Zoro's got one eye now. Well, that sucks for him, but seriously, it's really cool to see the progression all of these guys have gone through, communicating to us visually the stark difference between them then and them now. Oh, also, there's this really bad guy in the ranks of the fake Straw Hats that led them to be ultimately disbanded and taken over, who looks like he'll be important later considering how much focus he got on during these chapters, and, I mean, just look at that character design. But moreover, the best part about this reintroduction to the series is the humor and flavor the arc set up for us. There's this tremendous sense of anticipation and joy when the Straw Hats are looking for each other at the archipelago. And when they all do eventually arrive at the Thousand Sunny after it's finished being prepped by Rayleigh for deep sea adventures, Luffy doesn't spend much time embracing or hugging them, but instead gets right back to business. They have an adventure to go on, and with that, they dive into the deep below. It's awesome, and I can't wait to see what's next. Also, shout out to Duval, who kept the ship safe for like 2 years. What a guy! But before we move on next week to the rest of this epic story with my review of Fishman Island, I thought with this being the natural break in the story, it would be the perfect time for me to share with you guys my top 5 favorite arcs and my rankings of the Straw Hat crew. I shared my personal rankings of the Straw Hat Pirates a few months ago on Twitter, so it'll be interesting to see how much that list has changed today and whether or not it will change again by the time I finish this story. But first things first, time to list off TNM's top 5 favorite arcs from One Piece's first half, even though it's not really a half, it's more like the first 60%. Choosing your favorite arcs in a long-running series can be an excruciatingly difficult enterprise, having to take into account your own personal feelings on the matter while also taking into consideration the broader context and significance it plays in the greater story. A troubling challenge for sure. If you're a scrub, today I present Totally Not Mark's perfectly balanced and clearly objective list of the absolute best arcs in One Piece, and if yours isn't on here, that means you're objectively wrong and I'm absolutely calling your taste trash. This is a joke. So, what are we waiting for? Let's kick things off with number 5, the Skypia arc. Funnily enough, while I write this, I get the distinct impression that there will be a large number of you that will take specific issue with Skypia making my list of favorite arcs from this first section of the series. And while I can't speak to how the anime told the story specifically, I can only speak to my own experiences. And I found Skypia to not only be incredibly fun, but even after all has been said and done, it might actually be the most ambitious standalone arc I've read of One Piece. While it does lean on material established in Jaya, the Skypia arc, even discounting the aspects from Jaya, establishes so much and pays off everything in a single story arc. An entirely new aesthetic for the world's environments, new technology, many new cultures with their own visible social structures, as well as hints to powers that become incredibly important the longer the story pushes forward. And perhaps the most impressive aspect is that these superlative world-building attributes inform the story being told and its conclusion. I described Skypia as a combination of Dances with Wolves, Indiana Jones, and Jack and the Beanstalk, and to be honest, I stand by that. It's got the magic of a fairy tale, the adventure to rival any of Indiana Jones's best, and it has a sense of foreboding that distinctly reminds me of the frontier in North America. Juggling literal magic, incredible fight scenes, and complex social dilemmas that create such a specific flavor that it's unmistakably, specifically Skypia. This arc I adored, and it has an identity more distinct than any other on this list. Number 4, Arlong Park.
Definitely a sequel.
You can't pay the cash, then you're out with the trash.
If not for Arlong Park, this entire One Piece series I've created might not have existed. Something a lot of you might not be aware of is that when I decided to tackle this One Piece story, I did so with only 2 videos planned concretely. The first covering Romance Dawn to Barate and the second covering the events of Arlong Park. I had said to myself and my friends at the time that if the story had not captured my own interest or my audience's at that point, I would have stopped there and then, not having continued the story at all. But this arc, Arlong Park, changed my perspective on One Piece entirely, transforming from a sort of ordinary shonen adventure story to an emotionally mature action drama dealing with themes and personal dilemmas that not only served to hold my interest, but as many of you became aware of during this video series, acted as the impetus for me to become incredibly attached to these characters in a way that I had not experienced with stories I had grown up with. Taking the primary point of view character to be Nami, we get tons of backstory and real life struggle that not only build up an incredibly tragic picture of Nami's life up until that point, but also a powerfully emotional interaction between 2 spectacular characters, the likes of which I hadn't personally been exposed to before. Arlong Park hits emotional highs that rival any of the other arcs in my opinion. Number 3, Water 7. I spent a shocking amount of time deliberating which I'd include on this list from the Water 7 saga, the Water 7 arc or Enies Lobby. And to be perfectly honest, I was a much bigger fan of Water 7 than the latter. Now, that's not to say that I didn't enjoy or love Enies Lobby. It was brilliant. It just wasn't as good as the other entries on this list for me. Water 7 offered a ton of variety, comedy, and stood as the backdrop for the single most emotional and compelling conversations in the entire series, that I've seen anyway. To this date, Usopp and Luffy's interactions during this arc are still my favorite examples of creative writing and dialogue from the entire series, also offering my favorite fight scene too between them. In addition to that, I loved the way the city of Water 7 looked. The picturesque landscapes and waterways offered a lot in the way of world building, and that's not even to mention the intriguing plot with Nico Robin and the swerve at the very end with Sanji being one step ahead of everybody at the train station. Thinking back to my page turn onto that reveal still makes me smile. I loved Enies Lobby as a fantastic climax to the story, but Water 7 really did have everything else that made that arc as good as it was. It established characters, relationships, subversions, and it still had more compelling action to boot. For me, Water 7 was on another level and takes the number 3 spot easily. Number 2, Alabasta. Similar to the last entry, I spent a lot of time deliberating whether or not Alabasta would take the top spot or this one, and it's easy to see why. The Alabasta arc is lengthy but not too long, and it is its very own intricate self-contained story, full of new characters, political structures, wonderful geography, wildlife, and action. But even taking all of that out of the equation, the Alabasta arc does a phenomenal job of interweaving emotion and feeling into the narrative through short but illuminating scenes like that between the old man and Luffy and Yuba, Vivi's lamenting at her country falling into ruin, and even through all the major characters providing the single best send-off in the series, which felt so distinctly One Piece it hurt. And that's not even to make mention of my favorite warlord of the sea in Crocodile. While we would later meet and face off against other warlords of the sea, some being even more formidable than Crocodile, there's no denying the charisma and Bond villainess type aura Croc brought to each and every single scene he engaged within, offering a moveset that posed interesting challenges to the themes, fights, and overall plot of the story. Croc was a near perfect inclusion for this arc and served it accordingly. But one more additional aspect that made Alabasta stand out amidst the rest was how it incorporated and made use of every single main character like no other, utilizing all the Straw Hats and Luffy in tandem, creating a sense that everyone was struggling to the very end. It's a spectacular, action-packed, rich, and emotional roller coaster that I literally could not recommend more. Number 1, Marineford. 30 chapters. In 30 chapters, Oda created a climax that befitted not just a 4-part saga, but created, established, and delivered an incredible climax equally cathartic and tragic in measure for the entire series so far. To reiterate, this wasn't just a great climax for the saga, but a great climax for the series so far. That shouldn't be possible, let alone in 30 chapters. Recontextualizing relationships established in the first chapter, during Alabasta, and thereafter. This arc takes all the best elements from all the other arcs and smashes them together in a war effort the likes of which I've not seen yet committed to the page of a manga. The struggles are visceral, the tension is high, and the battles are nothing short of brutal, with violence the likes of which we've not seen in the series and consequences that will echo throughout the pages of every subsequent volume I'll read through into the future. Marineford is the endgame of One Piece, a story that shouldn't be possible to pull off, but somehow it was, and I was utterly floored by it. And while arcs like
Oops. Oh, this is great. These guys just sit here and hit other enemies. I don't even have to try. Those D boots will be mine in no time. You know what they say? D's boots. They ain't just meant for walking. Alright, somebody said... Oh, I don't have a rope, so I can't go down there. Okay, that's fine. And these enemies are just helping me fight.
Like Enies Lobby also concern themselves with just a climax like Marineford. Unlike Enies Lobby, Marineford introduces and is
Make sure I'm
about
fighting the
Whitebeard
enemy.
and Ace,
Yep.
with the relationship taking center stage, acting as its very own standalone story in some measure, all the while introducing new characters, reintroducing old ones, establishing set pieces, and that's not even to mention the complicated action that literally everyone is taking part in. This was the arc that demonstrated so perfectly why Oda spending all that time world building and establishing characters over the course of the series worked so well in his favor. I have in the past seen shows or other pieces of media create a war setting, and while some are closer than others, none, in my opinion, even approach this level of satisfaction and urgency Marineford so effortlessly delivered.
Oh, they drop it.
I'd like to extend a special thank you to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring today's video. We've never been more reliant on the internet than we are today, and this reliance is rapidly increasing. Our entertainment, our finances, and even some of us have jobs that rely on a robust online infrastructure. As our online presence is ever increasing, we'd like to think we're safe too, and so we need proper security. Surfshark is a VPN service that protects your information from unwanted individuals by encrypting all the data that you send through the internet. But a great reason to use a VPN is for content that might be hidden behind certain region locks like Netflix does. With Surfshark, you can solve that problem by simply changing your location. Not only is this good for people who want to keep up with their favorite shows, but it's great for me specifically because I want to watch One Piece on Netflix when it's inexplicably blocked in my country. This very moment, Surfshark VPN has a great deal going. By following my link in the description and using your promo code TNM, it not only gives you a whopping 85%.
Alright, well, I made my promise. And I'm
that's
a man.
how you get drops.
Yeah.
Now, if only you had done that for Zimbabwe gems. Some booble gems. Also, Ivan, how do you feel about puffers?
Puffers.
Yeah, I'm watching the rest of the Bean video.
Oh, I didn't get that far. Is he making modules?
He I think he's got the modules making. He's talking about this time it came up because of something else. He didn't want to make more puffers.
Oh, was he getting like some sort of liquid or not liquid gas or something?
Something? I think ammonia was relevant, but I don't know what step we're on now.
Man, that's sick. These Slayer boots are freaking swag as frig. Alright, I will make good on my promise, but I do need to do Tears of Gothics, but that'll only take a minute. I'm a man of my word. I'm a man of my word, do you hear me, grind gods? I wouldn't lie. Now give
To the
me
ends of the earth!
give me good drops. That was 1 out of 128, 15 kills. Maybe my luck is I'm allowed to get lucky on things where getting lucky doesn't save you much time. Because those 15 kills were literally 5 minutes. And
maybe you should go level your crafting already so you can use those gems, and then since they're not going to save you anything anymore.
Wait, that's not really how that works. It's not a crafting shortcut.
Well, no, I thought you weren't leveling crafting until you got them because then you'd have a reason to.
Yeah, that was the plan.
So waste your time leveling crafting, so
And off, but also 3 months of service.
Something
totally for free.
magic, I don't know.
Surfshark also offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk in trying it out for yourself. Now, back to the video.
Where's the nearest gate?
I figured out that when you get wet, your body hardens, so you can be clobbered when you're a big stiff. I'm angry and I'm wet.
Tell me a story. Okay. And then I got my boots and 15 kills. That story sucks. Everyone's a critic.
Time for my game to close again.
Can you believe me and Pat are gonna play the same game and Talon's not gonna play it?
Yes.
Oh.
Oh my god, playing Beat Mania.
Okay.
Okay, time to rank all 9 of the Straw Hats. Don't hurt me. Ranking the Straw Hats was a much more difficult task than choosing my favorite arcs. I found myself flip-flopping between so many of them, but I had to make my decisions at the end of the day, so here they are. Let it be known, however, that before I dive in, just because certain Straw Hats are at the bottom of my ranking list here, that doesn't mean I don't like them. It just means that I like them less than the ones towards the top. So, coming in at number 9...
ちょっと失礼。
Brooke. I like Brooke. I think he can be funny, and his backstory is one of the most tragic, if not the most tragic, out of all of the Straw Hats. And while this might be my lack of time spent with the character talking, I found personally that if I removed all of his crass gags about women's underwear and removed his skeleton puns, while there is definitely a character beneath, I did.
Alright, let me cut the stream and come back when I've got it downloaded. Be right back, stream.